Hello everybody, this is David Collins from Ann Arbor Guitars, and today we're going to do something of a tool feature on one of the tools that we designed a few years back and had in production for a limited run, but gets used an awful lot in our shop now that we have it. This classical came in with a number of issues related to the saddle and saddle fit. The bottom of the slot itself is a little bit crude and has rather rough rounded corners in it. The corners are not square, and so there's really no way to get good contact throughout. So we're going to show you the tool we use to clean up the slot, to square up the sides, to square up the corners at the bottom, and control the width to not enlarge it any more than necessary to hit the maximum outer points that it currently has. Several years ago, I did do a video on this tool before, which is a saddle mill I really made from spare parts that I had laying around my shop or picked up from the university labs. All sorts of feed screws, bearings, all of these parts were simply sourced from what I had around, made out of scrap aluminum. And if you'd like, you can go back and watch that video, but we're going to cover most of the things in here today. Now, our current version of this tool is a bit more refined. If we look at the underside, it starts with a base plate that has an area that vacuum seals around the bridge and a solid cork support in front. It is padded in the middle of the open area to prevent any large unsupported areas from being exposed to too high of a pressure from vacuum. Then we move up to the main carriage, and one of the changes we made on this compared to the old one is we used bearings that were more suited for a dirty environment. Our old version had ball bearings that had to be cleaned regularly. They're constantly being exposed to dust and debris. So these bearings are much better suited to such an environment. Same thing with the linear bearings that the whole carriage rises on. And the carriage has three main components or main controls. We have one guide bushing that holds the spring to balance it out. Then we have a depth stop that we can set our maximum depth of the cut, and then a zero lash plunge screw to do a clean plunge so that we don't have to tilt a router into it as is often done on conventional bases. And it has a much more precise plunge along the Z-axis than a lot of other plunge bases for small cutters. So let's go ahead and pull the guitar out and show you how it works. We're going to start by simply placing the entire unit onto the guitar top and getting a rough center. We turn on our laser pointer. I don't know how well this shows up on camera, but the laser pointer guides us into a rough alignment. Then we turn on the vacuum pump. And vacuum seal the base to the instrument top. Now we're going to come in and try to loosen up the carriage now that the base is locked down. We're going to come in and try and get as close of an alignment as we can by eye, but that's only going to get us in the ballpark, really. Now, we do have a 3/32 cutter in here. At this point, I'm going to turn off the laser alignment and bring our lamp right down into the frame where I can get a better view of the slot. And we're going to carefully bring our cutter, loosen up the depth stop in the back, and bring our cutter down, and these are locked in right now. I'm going to loosen them up, and I'm going to pull this through and see if I can get any. The cutter is not plugged in, of course. That's why I'm able to touch the collar. I want to see if I get any kind of touch. I am touching on the back side of it, just barely. You can see I'm just scraping some finish. I don't know if the camera is dialed in enough for that. So we might be right about on. And then when I move the other direction, I'm cutting finish on the front side. So we seem to be pretty much right centered up. I have to remove the end stops. These are for closed steel string saddles. Okay, we're hitting a little harder there, so I'm going to bring this side in just a bit. That looks about good. We're hitting both ways. So now we have to come in and carefully check the depth. Make sure that we're not hitting on the, make sure we're not hitting on the wings And when I bring this down, you can actually see it flex the top. I'm going to bring it down to just make contact. We're going to start there and set our depth stop and lock it in. Then we raise the cutter up, bring it over to the other side, and see if it, not quite deflecting the top yet. So we are going to go ahead and lock everything in and do our first cut with that and see what the cutting marks show us, see where we're hitting. Okay, I'm going to see if the camera can pick this up. Get the light in there, and we really do seem to be hitting the front edge all the way across. Again, not sure how well the camera can see into those shadows, but the back edge we seem to be hitting as well. We're perfect, and really haven't widened the slot. The bottom, however, the base of the slot, we are certainly not hitting all the way across. There's a few spots where you can see, where I can see at least, that it's not making it all the way down to the bottom. So now we are going to return the cutter to its original full depth position, lock the carriage in place, then we can loosen up our depth stop, come in and set a 10 thousandths feeler gauge under the stop for an additional 10 thousandths depth. Now we're going to unlock the carriage, rise the base, and do another cut. Okay, and now I will try to get as clear of a shot as I can at the base of the slot, although shooting ebony seems to be, shooting shadows in ebony seems to be outside of my expertise in terms of photography or cinematography. But by the eye, we can see this is clearly clean all the way down. We now have a clean base to the slot all the way through, and we haven't widened the edges at all. In all honesty, I was kind of hoping that we would have to do a second pass so I could show you that feature, which is, we're not going to make another cut, but let's say this slot had as much wander, as much warp to it as I initially thought it did, then what we would do is come in and say we had to cut a few thousandths, 3 or 4 thousandths further back. Then we would come in, loosen up our secondary stop, and come in with a 3 or 4 thousandths feeler gauge, lock this secondary stop in place in the new position, and double check, lock everything in there, and then we can loosen up the carriage and slide the entire carriage back just another 4 thousandths. Likewise, if we had to come to the front further, we could make a second pass by just bringing the stop up to lock against the original position and then moving the carriage front by feeler gauge, moving the carriage forward, and get the same results. We can get perfectly parallel consecutive paths. We can adjust for that quite easily and quickly. But in this case, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the vacuum and unplug the cutter and place it back in its stand. Now, just to show how cleanly we were able to cut and how accurately to the original slot, this is the saddle that I had pulled off earlier. I'm going to stick this back in, and you can see it still has a little bit of that same wiggle it originally had. I think the saddle itself is a little bit wrong for the slot, but certainly no more. If anything, At this point, it almost feels more solid than it did before the cutting, simply because we were able to square up the bottom. Nonetheless, the saddle is still a little bit off for this slot. We are going to make a new saddle for it, but now the process of making the saddle will be so much easier because it's a perfect, consistent width and flatness to the bottom, so we don't have to try to accommodate any kind of nuances on the guitar in replicating those errors on the saddle to get a proper fit. Now this is one simple use for the cutter, but there are a whole lot more. One of the most common uses for it we have is for leveling out the bottom of acoustic electric guitars with unbalanced pickup output. So often people will end up pulling their hair out trying to balance out acoustic electric pickups because the bottom of the slat is deformed either through stress over time or it was just never cut proper to begin with. And trying to match the inconsistencies of the bottom of a saddle slot perfectly with the saddle on top so that you get even pressure across the pickup is nearly impossible. So for that, now we just pull this out and we can safely re-level the bottom of the slot without worrying about expanding it or any kind of slippage or error, as in conventional tools that were a little bit more sloppy plunge. I'll concede this tool might seem a little bit superfluous when for $150 you can buy a Dremel, get a cheap bass, and make a wood platform that clamps on with a couple of rails that guides it smoothly. Dremels, kind of apples and oranges, they don't have very precise collets. They wander a lot. These actually we retrofit with a precision collet. It's not just the standard router collet that comes on these DeWalt's originally. There's something to be said for the confidence in always being able to do the job right, in eliminating hesitation to clean up a slot when you might not otherwise if you weren't as sure in your tools. And that, I feel, is one of the more important values of tools like these. Yeah, they might seem a little bit over the top, but I do have one colleague, another shop, excellent Luthiers, who recounted a story of a pre-war Martin that had kind of an iffy saddle slot. The support wasn't great. It could have been improved quite easily, but the liability of a slip or mistake was just too great. So they opted to leave the saddle slot as it was rather than correcting it and taking care of it and making it fit truly proper. The guitar ended up selling, and a few months later the bridge broke and came back, and then they were stuck with the cost of having to go back and replace the whole bridge. Had they had a tool like this that made it so simple, then the hesitation is gone. You see an issue, you pull it out, 5 minutes later you're done, rather than 20-30 minutes of setup and a not 100% certain outcome in the results. So it's not something everybody needs. We did make these for a brief period. It was ridiculously expensive. The bearings alone on this tool before making any of the parts were about $1,200 at the time. But everything on this, we just didn't want to compromise any quality. And again, large initial investment, but we're glad that we have it now. So I expect we will continue to do videos now and then on tools and fixtures in our shop that people seem to be interested in. Everything ranging from the more extravagant, elaborate tools like this to perhaps some of the simplest tools like this piece of brass that's hammered out into a very particular shape that probably ends up being arguably the most valuable tool in my shop in terms of how much use it sees every single day. But plenty of interesting things to show around here, and we will try to get videos out as often as we can. If you're interested in seeing more of those, please don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thanks.